Erik Karlsson is now in the East. The Arizona Coyotes are thinking the postseason, and we rank the top 10 goalies in the Western Conference on today's episode of Locked On NHL.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into a Western Conference Tuesday edition of Locked On NHL, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for tuning into today's episode of Locked On NHL. Make sure if you haven't already, you take the time to subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the rest of the offseason. On today's episode of Locked On NHL, Nick Morgan and I go through the Erik Karlsson trade, the big move to Pittsburgh, what's next for the San Jose Sharks after trading away yet another franchise superstar. We'll also talk about Matt Dumba signing in Arizona and the Arizona Coyotes thinking postseason here in 2023-2024. And, of course, we'll finish with another rank-some as we take a look at the top 10 goalies in the Western Conference. My name is Seth Toupal, host of Locked On Wild, joined by my Tuesday co-host, Nick Morgan of Locked On Predators. Nick, we've got a meaty one here today because the final domino of the offseason happened over the weekend. Erik Karlsson to San Jose. So we get to break that down here today. How's it going?
It's going good. Finally, some juicy news to talk about. You know, it kind of feels like that was the last big matzo ball in the matzo ball soup of this NHL offseason that we had to really digest. And it's finally done. And I got to say, a little surprised with how the deal finally shook out. And I'm sure you're surprised as well.
I was. It ended up being a 3-team, 12-asset trade that included players, that included prospects, that included draft picks. It's the biggest trade in San Jose Sharks history. And so it seems fitting that it would be Erik Karlsson going to Pittsburgh. Nick, there are a lot of angles to break down for this. The Montreal Canadiens were involved. The San Jose Sharks got one first-round pick and a couple of players on expiring contracts. Ultimately, did San Jose get enough, or did they really have no choice in getting this return for Erik Karlsson?
Well, they didn't have a lot of leverage, but here's the thing. I've seen a lot of people talk about this and saying, you know, the Sharks are losers. They lost Karlsson and didn't get much in return. The biggest part of this deal, Seth, is the Sharks only retained $1.5 million. We were talking, you know, all throughout the trade deadline, so the Sharks might have to retain like maybe as much as half of this. Like they might have to have like, you know, $6-7 million on the books, you know, to get this guy off the roster and to be able to not only get him with only retaining like 1.5, that's $10 million off the books, but you also have a couple of expiring contracts as well who can step into the lineup throughout this year. So that was the biggest thing for San Jose to me. Not necessarily who they got back or the draft pick they got back, which, you know, knowing Pittsburgh will probably be somewhere, you know, high 19s or high teens, something like that. But it's about the flexibility. This is the situation to kind of handcuff the Sharks long term. And Mike Grier, I think, did a good job of just making sure the Sharks were going to be flexible moving forward.
And it's a tricky situation, too, because the Karlsson contract, there's 4 more years on it. And he's getting up there in age. And so I don't know that it's necessarily a question that he'll make it through the deal. But what sort of player do you have in those final 2 years and that final year of that deal? And as for Pittsburgh, I mean, this is just Kyle Dubas in a nutshell. This is just what he does. And now he's taken his show to Pittsburgh and is trying to put together a team that can maximize the last couple of years of Sidney Crosby in Pittsburgh. And so from the Dubas perspective, really not a lot to give up other than some players on the roster and that first round pick. not a lot to give up in terms of prospects and assets to bring in a guy who is just going to be a massive weapon for them in the East.
Yeah, I mean, essentially a first round pick. That's kind of the bulk of the deal. I think they had like another second round pick that wound up in Montreal at that as well. And if you're Pittsburgh, like that's fine. Like I know a lot of people are saying, well, this isn't what they need to be doing. They should be looking towards the future, past the Crosby and Malkin era. Internally, that's not what the Penguins are saying. Like we know the situation. They're going to try to milk Crosby and Malkin for all it's worth. They're going to try to get anything they can to get that one last cup run out of them. Is Erik Karlsson that guy that gets him there? I'm not quite sure. Are like you mentioned, are we going to get the Erik Karlsson from last year that won the Norris and topped 100 points? Or are we going to get the Erik Karlsson 2-3 years ago that showed signs of regression? I think that's a big question mark. But at the end of the day, for the Penguins, it's a bit of a gamble, but one that you would want to make if you're Kyle Dubas, just to try to see if you can get another cup run there.
Yeah, and I don't blame Dubas for trying to kind of kick the can down the road as far as the future is concerned, because you're dealing with a post Sidney Crosby landscape, and I don't know if anybody in Pittsburgh wants to talk about that right now. So it makes sense to just say we'll just deal with that when we have to. But the fascinating part, I think, is what happens now for San Jose, because we've seen them now deal Brent Burns to Carolina and now Erik Karlsson to Pittsburgh. And it really is, I think, a continuance of Mike Grier trying to get to kind of that base level and then just start to build things back up over the next couple of years through the draft, getting some high picks, and very much in a similar manner to where Chicago is going right now.
Yeah, and you're just trying to, like I said, that's be flexible. That's kind of their main goal. There's been a lot of people kind of pointing at San Jose and say they're going to do what Chicago did last year and kind of just be, the good old fashioned tank job to try to get another high pick. I don't know if that's going to be the case or not. I'm also interested to see, what other moves, the Sharks might make. I mean, they have some big contracts still on the books. They just got Tomas Hertl, who's still very much, in the infant stages of that big contract he just signed. You got Logan Couture at 4 more years, $8 million per. So it's interesting if Mike Grier is going to kind of sit on that and be like, okay, we've kind of done what we can, or maybe there's maybe a little bit more in the Sharks tank here, a little bit. Maybe they're more aggressive at moving another big contract off the board and just kind of trying to see what they can get for it. But I'm very curious to see what the Sharks do next, because this is a team that I think maybe still has some more tinkering left to do to bottom out. I don't want to say tank, but maybe bottom out is the right word.
Well, I know one thing that they won't do. There was a little bit of some rumors that maybe they were going to be a suitor for Matt Dumba, depending on where Karlsson ended up going. Well, he's not going to San Jose because he signed with Arizona, and Arizona is feeling some kind of way here as this offseason moves on. So we will continue today's episode of Locked On NHL discussing the Arizona Coyotes offseason and their chances in the Western Conference playoff picture that is on the way after this. Our next partner is a product that I use on an everyday basis. And really all it comes down to is just trying to simplify your vitamin and supplement routine, going from multiple bottles of vitamins and supplements to just one scoop in a glass of water each day. That one scoop can provide you with up to 75 high-quality vitamins and minerals that encompass everything from your gut health to your energy throughout the day, so no more crashing at your desk during the lunch hour. If you want a comprehensive solution for all of your supplements, then try AG1 and get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D and 5 free AG1 travel packs with your first purchase. Go to drinkag1.com/NHL Network. That's drinkag1.com/NHL Network. Again, drinkag1.com/NHL Network. Check it out today. Continuing today's episode of Locked On NHL, a Western Conference Tuesday. Thank you once again for making Locked On NHL your first listen each and every day. Seth Toupal joined by Nick Morgan. Nick, the Arizona Coyotes continue to make some moves here this offseason. They've added Nick Bjugstad back, Jason Zucker, Matt Dumba now in the fold, a 1-year, $3.9 million deal, and the Coyotes' social media admin had an interesting way of announcing the signing with a Photoshop of Matt Dumba, but then the X or tweet, the thing formerly known as a tweet.
We'll figure out.
Yeah, we're still working on that. It said the Yotes are a wagon. Dare we say the P word? And they were, of course, talking about the playoffs. Now, I'm all for social media admins getting into it and feeling some kind of a way, but have the Coyotes done enough to knock on the door of a postseason berth this year?
I mean, let me answer it in this way. I like what the Coyotes have done this offseason. Another guy, you mentioned all the players. They got another guy is Sean Durzi, who is a very capable top 4 defenseman in Los Angeles last year, on a very good team, Kings team. Is it enough for the Coyotes to make the playoffs? I mean, you look at this team and does it scream playoff team? No. Do you look at them and say they are distinctly better than, let's say, like 8 or 9 teams that might make the playoffs? No. But here's the thing. Is this a team that can take a big step forward this year? That's not out of the question either. And, you mentioned all the people they brought in. They also have Logan Cooley waiting in the wings. That's going to make his debut this year. You have Clayton Keller, still under 25 years old, maybe the most underrated player in the NHL right now. And he's somebody who just topped 86 points. He's only going to get better. You have all this young talent sort of ready to go. And if you're the Coyotes, look, I'm not going to bet playoff money or anything like that, but maybe instead of being like, have the 5 or 6 pick next year, maybe they're like 9 or 10. And then maybe the year after that, maybe once some of these young players, get their feet wet a little bit, take strides, then maybe in a couple years we can look at this Coyotes team and it's like, okay, is this a team ready to make a step towards a playoff? I'm not saying that's going to happen this year, but I do like what the Coyotes have done. And I do see them maybe taking a big step forward this year. Maybe just not playoffs.
Yeah, and I think FanDuel is reflecting some of that as well, because I'm looking through some of their odds for various things. The Coyotes are currently plus 1,100 for worst regular season record in 2023-2024. So they are way off of the pace of the San Jose Sharks, who we just talked about. And so I think we're starting to see some of that notoriety of, okay, this is a team that is trying to get above the likes of Chicago, the likes of Anaheim, the likes of San Jose. And honestly, I think the Coyotes performed well enough last year to give a ton of teams fits. I cover one in particular that they did a couple of times. They gave the Avalanche a run for their money in a few different games. And so that's the hope for Arizona right now, is that you're starting to see those young guys make strides. You inject veteran presences into the lineup. But on the flip side, let's say things don't go well. Arizona has, I think, 3 very marketable assets on the trade deadline that they can flip for prospects. And I think that's something that they should look at doing And that's why on Locked On Wild, I went so far a few weeks ago to say Matt Dumba makes a ton of sense for Arizona. If they sign him to a 1-year deal, if he plays well, if they're not doing well, you flip him at the deadline and you're ahead prospects or draft picks.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're playing this well in that if they do well, these guys are going to be a big part of it. If not, they're going to come away out in front at the deadline. Now, I'm with you. I don't know that it's enough for a postseason push because you just look at the top teams in both conference or in both divisions.
Mm-hmm.
Vegas, the Kings, the Kraken, Edmonton, those are four pretty solidly in the playoff picture teams. In the Central, Colorado and Dallas, those guys are going to be in the postseason picture as well. You then have the contingent of Minnesota, you've got St. Louis, you've got Winnipeg, you've got Nashville, who are all in similar proximity to each other. And so those teams, I think at minimum, not counting what Vancouver could do, not counting what Calgary is hoping to do, those are the teams at minimum that you would have to jump. And so I think it's a little too much. I respect the hustle tremendously of the Coyotes social media team to get the buzz going, because a team like Arizona deserves to have some buzz for once. And I think it all culminates to they are nearing a extension with their head coach, or is rumored that there was going to be an extension going on relatively soon. So it feels like for the first time in a long time, Arizona has all their cards in a row. They just need a few things to go right.
And why not? Because look at the Arizona Coyotes as a franchise. They're trying to get somewhere in Arizona to give them a long-term home. They're trying to get this fan base re-energized. They're just trying to find something positive to build on. So why not just go out, sign some players? I would say this is the most, active they've been in any sort of free agency or trade market, in terms of getting people into Arizona in a very long time, probably all the way back to that, 6-month span where they brought Phil Kessel and Taylor Hall in. Why not? Like, let's just try to get some of that buzz back in Arizona. And as you said, like, if it doesn't work out, it's almost like what Steve Yzerman has done with the Red Wings. You just bring in some veteran guys that, you hope can add some juice to your lineup and help these young players. And if you're not in a position to make the playoffs, then they're perfect people to just, maybe get a second or, an extra third round pick at the deadline. And they're not, I don't think we're going to have like a Jacob Chikrin situation with anybody else on the roster anytime soon, where you're just not sure what to do with. I mean, Clayton Keller's locked up for 5 more years. You don't think you're going to have to worry about Carl Vejmelka or anything like that. All your other key building blocks are 21 years or younger. So for Arizona, things may be looking up. Robin, Matthew from Locked On Coyotes, if you're listening, we like what you're doing.
We respect it. We respect the hustle. And we'll be rooting for a postseason push probably next year. Mm-hmm. If it happens this year, I'm going to be banging the table for it.
Oh, for
sure. I think that would be a riot to have postseason hockey at Mullet Arena. Mm-hmm. Let's see what happens. Now, one of the main reasons that the Coyotes maybe are not going to get to the postseason is that they just don't have the goaltending yet. But we are going to go and give you 10 goalies who definitely do have it in the Western Conference as we finish today's episode of Locked On NHL after this. Final segment of today's episode of Locked On NHL, a Western Conference Tuesday. Seth Toupal joined by Nick Morgan. Thank you once again for making Locked On NHL your first listen each and every day. It's Rank 'em time as we will be taking a look at the top 10 goalies in the Western Conference as of right now. Now, if you followed along with our inaugural edition of our rankings where we ranked the top 10 coaches, what we're going to do is throughout the rest of the offseason, we'll rank various positions in the Western Conference. We're only doing a top 10. So there are going to be teams who have players left off the list, who don't quite make the cut, but we will reserve the right to make adjustments as the season goes on. We'll check back, and I can look at some of mine and say, yeah, I didn't know what I was talking about here at all. So very excited to dive into the goalies because Western Conference has some good ones, to say the least. So, Nick, I think what we're going to do, I like having you lead this off, and then what I'll do is I'll just give commentary and kind of go through my picks, higher, lower, what have you. Yeah. So feel free to hit me with your list.
All right, so let's start with the top because I think there's tiers here. I think there are 3 franchise goalies in the West. And when I say franchise goalies, I mean guys who consistently year in and year out have proven to be among the best goalies in the NHL.
Yep.
That's Connor Hellebuyck, that's UC Saros, and that's Jake Ottinger. Those are the 3 to me. Right now, I'm sorry, my own people listening. To me, I have Hellebuyck as number 1 in the West. For the sole reason that he beat UC Saros head-to-head last year. I have Saros number 2, and I know there's going to be maybe some Stars fans not happy with that, but here's the thing with UC Saros last year. I don't think enough people respect what UC Saros did. And I know like only 2 shutouts and, low goals against and all that. Look at the Nashville Predators and look at the defensive stats. They were the 3rd worst defensive team in the NHL, only above Columbus and Anaheim, number 2, or like the 2 worst teams in the NHL last year, and just barely behind the Chicago Blackhawks, who were the number 1 pick. And for UC Saros to take that team, who should have been a Connor Bedard contender, and lead them to 1 spot, 1 game away from a postseason berth, I don't think enough people respect what UC Saros did. And then I have Jake Ottinger 3. I'm going to pause there just to give you, Seth, a chance to comment on the top 3, because I know you got some opinions on
that. Great start, because I agree with you that this is a list that needs to be broken up, because you're spot on. You're talking first about the guys that are the unquestioned goalies of their team. You have a backup solely because you need to have one on your team, on your roster, but it's not a backup that factors a ton into what's going on. And you are, as somebody who covered them all season, you are right on with UC Saros, because there were many nights in which the disparity in shots, the disparity in time in the zone was hilariously distorted.
Hilarious is not the word I would use, but go ahead.
And so I don't think he got nearly enough credit for keeping the Predators afloat, which is why I'm putting him number 1, because I think it's unbelievable to me. And this isn't something that just happened, this past season. He's been doing this for a while.
Yeah.
And the numbers year in, year out are fantastic. He's unquestioned not only the best goalie in the Central Division, but I think he is without a doubt the best in the Western Conference as well. So I'm going Saros 1. I'm going Hellebuyck number 2, because again, that Jets team basically rode Hellebuyck to a playoff push after they fell apart. And the reason they fell apart is because they were not able to score any goals. It wasn't like he cratered or anything. So I'm going Hellebuyck number 2, because also I think we see a little bit higher echelon from Hellebuck this year, showcasing his talents for potential suitors for a trade. And then I'm going Jake Ottinger, number 3. Ottinger is vastly rising in the Western Conference. And so it's not like 1, 2, 3. It's like these guys are pretty closely scrunched together, but I think of those 3, Saros and Ottinger and Hellebuck are at the top of my list, but I'm going to UC1 because again, and it was from a fantasy hockey perspective, I think that really opened my eyes to it.
Yeah.
Every night I'd look and it's like 58 saves again. Yeah. It's like they're playing the Ducks. How is this possible? But they just, if there was a puck on the ice, it was being possessed by the other team, like the whole game.
Oh, yeah. It's bizarre what he's done. And like we're saying, like think of Nashville, maybe the stats, like the baseline stats for UC Saros aren't impressive, but he's maybe allowing 3 goals a game, but that's because he's stopped 46 of 49. Just imagine if the Predators defense picks up and, all of a sudden he's stopping, 29 of 30. Like that's where he can get. I'm curious about the rest of the list. So here's what I had. This is going to be all over the place because now you're getting into, okay, their legacy as a goalie versus just how hot they've been lately.
Sure.
So this was the rest of my list. For you, Philip Gustafson, really like what he did. 5, I had Alexander Georgiev. 6, I cheated and just put the entire Vegas Golden Knights team because I couldn't bet who's going to be in goal next year, but all 7 goalies they used last season seemed to work out very well and all had pretty respectable numbers. Stuart Skinner 7. I had Thatcher Demko 8. 9, I got fancy and put a backup. Fabel Francouz. At number 9. And then 10 was debating between a couple people. And it's not often you're going to hear me put a sub 900 goaltender up there, but just based on legacy, given Jacob Markstrom 10.
And Jacob Markstrom is, I think, a great candidate for a bounce back year because that entire Flames team was in the meat grinder last year. Mm-hmm. So I like the list because I think Gustafson and Georgiev are pretty close in what they accomplished. I want to see another season of that from Gustafson before we put him in that franchise tier. Like, he obviously had a fantastic season, but it's possible that those numbers dip a bit to where we kind of see where he really is. And so if he is able to do this again, then I'm going to put him higher on the list. But I think 4 is a good spot. Georgiev is right there as well. And honestly, I don't really have any objections to the rest of your list. I'm glad, though, to not see a particular St. Louis Blues goalie in your top 10. He is, if we're doing like in terms of spectacle, he's number 1. Binnington is number 1. If we're doing like public spectacle and just like taunting fans, fighting other players on other teams, he's number 1 in that category. But he's got some work to do to get back into the top 10 of this list. And so we'll see how things play out as the season goes on. But another interesting one that I wanted to throw at you for this list as well was Philip Grubauer. I wouldn't put him in the top 10 at this point, but if he plays like he did in the postseason for the Kraken, especially early on, he might get back in there.
Yeah, I mean, just give him a good season. Like, he hasn't had a good season in 2 years with Seattle. Yeah. I think that's what kept him out. But like, again, like that was the playoffs kind of reminded you of this, last couple of years with Colorado. So not out of the question we see Grubauer bounce back up there.
We'll adjust these rankings as we go, but that will do it for today's episode of Locked On NHL. Make sure that you follow Nick and Locked On Predators for more Nashville Predators content, and myself with Locked On Wild for more Minnesota Wild content as well. Make sure you subscribe to Locked On NHL for more NHL content throughout the week. And we've got new episodes coming at you all week long as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.